through music, living here in DC, you saw celebrations of people who were of African descent or not of African descent coming together in the celebration of music. So culturally, I think I've had a very rich experience, and also growing up and living in grad school and undergrad in major cities. So yeah, through music, there's a lot of ways to celebrate our Pan-Africanism through music, and I think that's one example of how it's reached the world.
Thank you. I agree. I first want to say thank you to all the commissioners and all the government officials for inviting me to this panel. For me, I'm from New York. My parents are from Ghana. But in coming to Howard specifically, and being part of DC culture, for me, Blackness is this sense of experience, culture, music, the frame of reference is understanding that who I am and where I come from extends beyond this US border. Right? And when I come to a space such as DC, I'm able to experience an international version of that. So whether it's in music, whether it's in writing, whether it's in even traveling, right? The Black experience is a international diasporic experience that everyone shares in through even speaking, right? That's something that makes it unique, makes it ever evolving. Right? That's the idea that Blackness does have a lineage, but we're continuing to grow and expand as we go from here to the continent, through the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. So.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm originally from Guinea, West Africa, and I have lived longer in the United States than I have lived in Guinea, which means that it has been a very powerful learning experience for me, because in Africa, practically almost everybody is Black in a certain way. So you take it for granted. And being in the United States, what I learned from my Blackness in Africa is what is called communacracy, meaning the power of the community rather than just the individual. The individual has values, but the community defines the values. So being in America and learning from the Afro-American community, learning from the Caribbean community, and learning that Blackness is not to be taken for granted. It is an evolving and developing identity and set of values that has really influenced me very much. And I must confess, I'm still learning, and I'm happy to be learning at Howard University, the mecca of African American culture and intellect.
I asked that because throughout the communities, sometimes we shy away from Blackness, right? And that's just the reality of it. And I know everyone have their different nuances in the communities that they represent, but at the core or the origins of who we are, we're Black, right? And so I wanted you all to expand on that, and what was your experience with that? And Dr. Camara, you talked about how you were influenced in the culture. And so my next question is, how are our cultures similar throughout the diaspora? What influences have our cultures had on the global community, you know, be it food, clothing, traditions, from your different perspectives?
That's a question that in many ways answers itself, because all those things, food, culture, is how the African diaspora has impacted the world. When I thought about your question, I was thinking about this mashed plantain dish, which is like my favorite thing to eat, which as a Dominican I call mango. Puerto Ricans call it mofongo and Cubans call it fufu. All three of those words are derived from West African language. And so that's just a prime example of how Caribbean islands can it's essentially, there's some variation in the plate itself, but that one shared breakfast plate with three different names that are all derived from the same continent is a perfect example of how we've adopted, shared our Africanity throughout the world.
And I have a follow-up question to that. Do you feel that your community has that same sentiment?
That's a good question. I believe so. I mean, I can only speak from the Afro-Latino community in DC because I've never lived in my mother's home country for any extended period of time. But I do feel that, you know, Afro-Latinos that live in the United States are very aware of our history and our contributions, and, you know. So yes, thank you.
I agree as well. I was reading on my way here in the Hilltop about Mardi Gras, right? So we see Mardi Gras, we see Carnival, we see in the African communities the celebrations of color, vibrancy, history, and culture that kind of spans throughout place for African people, right? So that's a commonality. We have food for that kind. I'm from Ghana, West Africa. When you go to Ghana, they say the Jamaicans, the word Jamaican, Jamaka, tree, it means I am stuck in African, well, in tree. So the idea that even in language, like we're connected in what we say, where we come from. When we think about thought and writing and music and hip hop and drumming, we have those same commonalities we see across the water in different times and spaces. For jambalaya or Ghana, we say jollof. It's the same sense of rice and meat, vegetables, and spices, right? So I think across many spaces, if you think about where we learn these things from, there are many, many commonalities that connect us throughout the diaspora. So for us as African Americans, it's rich in African culture, it's rich in Caribbean culture, it's rich in Latin American culture, because we're all from that same tree of information and culture. Even in time, we laugh about CP time, right? But the idea for African people is that we don't start until everyone gets here, right?
Like today.
Like today, right? There's a time for us to start, which is a European maybe time, but we started when we all got here, and that's an African sense of community, not leaving anyone out. And unfortunately, our students do that too. You know, they don't start until everybody get there. They probably don't start until everybody get there, right? But that keeps us at our core, at our center, and it keeps us authentically growing and evolving as African people, as human beings, also, but connected also across time and space.
Yeah, in addition to what my colleagues have just very eloquently mentioned, you know, food, community, and other aspects of culture, I would like to really also add the family unit, family values. If you have not suffered, you have not been oppressed, you have not been discriminated against, you may not appreciate exactly how powerful the family unit can be. And black people everywhere have gone through those sufferings one way or the other. Whether we are oppressed in foreign land as enslaved people or descendants of enslaved people, or we are oppressed in our motherland by a foreign power that tells us that we are less than humans while using us to extract our own resources to enrich others. Either way, we are faced with this huge problem, and that has reinforced our sense of family to the point that the nuclear family doesn't make sense to us because it does not exist. Every member of the family, extended family as some would say, is an integral member of that family, and I think that is very important in what has kept us who we are, our collective self, our collective sanity, and be proud and held our heads high after centuries of subjugation.
Absolutely. You know, we, over Black History Month, we had a series called Sunday Dinner Series. How many people have seen it on the mayor's social media pages? That's not enough people. No, we got a lot of views. And it was very popular because we went into families' homes across the district and we had dinner with them. And, you know, we had some Afro-Caribbean dishes, we had, you know, soul food dishes, and people just talked about their family legacy here in the district. And it was one of the most fulfilling moments in my work because people got to share what binds them together, right? And over food. That's everything you guys mentioned. Food came up, so that means it's essential to our culture, regardless of the nuances, and that is here to stay, right? We need food for life. So
Yes.
awesome. So the next question I have is about travel. Across the diaspora, just name one country or region that you would recommend traveling to. And how does travel, or how can travel inspire and influence our people's worldview and outlook to increase collaboration?
Well, one place that I really remembered having a really good time at was celebrating the West African and Jamaican culture in London, in certain neighborhoods in London. That was a great time. It was many years ago that I went, but I would love to go back. Travel is that one thing that people always say you should do, that, you know, there's no better way to spend your money. And your second question was complicated, but I think that everybody grows in some way by getting to know another cultural, you know, experience, and kind of absorbing the similarities and the differences in the fellowship with people that look like you but live and have different lived experiences. So, I mean, I don't think you could ever put a value on that.
So I'll be a little selfish. So I'll say Ghana. My parents are from Ghana. But for me, Ghana specifically, because I think Ghana becomes one of those spaces that you can be unapologetically African. Like Ghana, color is bright, clothing is bright, kente is bright, food is bright, music is loud. They're just busting out the seams with just pride because of what Kwame Nkrumah and Pan-Africanism did to that country, right? So if you were able to get introduction to reversing the sale, right, from an African perspective, coming from DC or Maryland and going back to the continent, going through Ghana and the door of no return is a great introduction to kind of go to the other countries. So with language, with people, with legacy, Ghana for me becomes a good place to start with students. I had a student come to my office today. She said she's having difficulty making friends, and I was like, you know, maybe let's go abroad. Go to a space where you don't feel like you're a minority, right? Where you see people who look like you don't feel intimidated, you feel confident about yourself, and then maybe come back to the U.S. to kind of figure out what is this U.S. paradigm, right? So just going to the continent, I think, but starting with Ghana for me is a good start.
I would recommend Senegal in West Africa, in addition to what you both of you said. The door of non-return also exists in Senegal on the Gorée Island, one of those places where Africans were taken and into slavery to be brought to the New World. And Senegal has been really proactive in turning that painful memory into a place of pilgrimage, if you will. I have seen very powerful African Americans visit Gorée and come down on their knees and kiss the ground, while you see young Senegalese swimming in the ocean, swimming back and forth and accompanying the little boats that take people back and forth from mainland Dakar to the Gorée Island. That is, I believe, really very inspiring to help Africans, African Americans, and the global community of Black people to heal the wounds of enslavement, colonization, and so on. So I would recommend visiting Senegal.
Okay, I'm gonna do this in reverse now. Where was the last place that you had vacation?
Pardon me?
Where was the last place you had vacation? Just, where was the last place that you had vacation?
The last place I had vacation?
Yeah.
My own country, Guinea. Yes, the last time I went on vacation, really that was vacation, not work related and so on. It was Guinea, being with my family and really being African. Yeah.
The last place I visited was South Africa. So going to South Africa, I went with 35 students. We went to Cape Town and Johannesburg.
So with the students, it was vacation?
I mean, for them, yes. So it's after the semester's over, so vacation. So me, I guess I'm not vacationing. I guess I'm chaperoning, working. But that was, for me, enjoyment and travel, so I'll say that.
I echo Dr. Camara. I went to the Dominican Republic with my family as well.
So all of you went back home, right? Almost. Okay. And so we talk about this fictional place of Wakanda, right? Wakanda forever. Can that be achievable? You know, in terms of its innovation and technology, whether it's in America or if it's in Africa, how can we have that?
Well, I probably just have a question to add to yours in terms of the economy being so interconnected and how that would work if we had a Wakanda and we were self-sustaining. I would just also just additionally roll this into another question because we're so interconnected in this world through social media, through trade and all this kind of stuff. How could a Wakanda exist?
So the question is a little bit interesting for me because the sense of let's say an African country, does that exist physically? Yes, right? So physically, can Wakanda exist? It physically can because the continent is there and you can go back to the continent. Culturally, as far as in the film, the language is Kosa, they're singing an African language, the dress, the art, so yes. Economically, could we get to a point where we are sufficient economically? I think we can, right? I think we can, even if we're saying on the continent there's the United States of Africa with one currency, that can happen. And can that extend to us on this side? In this global market, it possibly can, right? So that means that we're not just using dollars and bitcoins, but we're using the rand, the city, and the dollar. So we can kind of think about using different currencies across the diaspora. Now when it comes to like defense, technology, I think that's where we have challenges because the institutional structure to divide us is very serious, right? So the idea that we can't be on the same page with medicine and environmental studies, like that's a hard thing that we have to really plan and work towards. But I think it can happen, but it just looks different on different levels, in different translations, in different industries, in different banking systems. You have to like really think hard about that. But I think it is possible. Physically exists, but in our minds, intellectually, to get to that, we have to really work towards taking out what is fighting us and then arming what can get us to where we want to get to. But Wakanda can exist.
I would say in a strategic way, one of the ways we can work towards that idealistic African country or African world would be to encourage the regional economic communities in Africa. Africa has, I believe, 6 regional economic communities because that will enable us to bypass all these the red tape of bureaucracy, politics, and so on. If you take West Africa, for example, the economic community of West African states has 15 countries. And there is free trade among all those. If you have a valid passport from Ghana, you can travel throughout the 15 countries without needing a visa. And they are working towards having one currency, freeing the Francophone African countries from the CFA French domination, and so on. And I believe that the same way we think about that idealistic community, we can bring it down to earth, and we have what it takes. Africa has all the strategic resources that the world needs. And the global black community has scientists, intellectuals. You think about it, NASA and everything else, if we put our heads together where our hearts are already together, we can achieve that. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime, but we have an objective and we can accomplish it. I believe so.
So thank you all for that. That's really insightful. Do you think the image of Africa would need to change for people to want to invest more or visit more or, make stakes there?
Just images in.
And just image of what Africa is and the dispelling the myths of what Africa is through the media or through,
Definitely. I think even in the film Black Panther, the fight between Killmonger and what's the guy? Black Panther, T'Challa. Like that myth needs to not be continued. That we are at war with each other. Like that needs to stop. The idea that we can't come to decisions without bloodshed, or we can't really work together. So I agree. I think the myths need to be dispelled, but what Africa really looks like is beautiful. So that image that exists of the real image, that needs to continue to be shared, but the myths need to be erased, right? And we need to work towards speaking about ourselves, how we see ourselves, looking at ourselves, how we see ourselves, and using language that supports how we see ourselves. Because again, Black Panther is based on Marvel. Marvel was created by white creators. So again, that's a white ideal of what they thought Africa could be. That's not our version of what we thought Wakanda would look like from our perspective.
It was very popular,
And it's interesting because the continent was also, a little bit upset. Or those from the continent felt that, is everybody in America really thinking that we look like this or we act like this, or we really at war with each other? That's not the authentic image of how we see development, right? Or how we see infrastructure. Yes, flying cars are cool, but we got other issues to also deal with besides flying cars. So I think that's a Jetson European sense of development, where we have hardcore central ideas of what family is, of what industry is, that is more than flying cars and war.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for that. In terms of economic, and it goes right into it, so our countries and communities have historically been exploited, and that's just the truth, and locked out of ownership opportunities, which we know that's the pathway to wealth. How can we collaborate to advance economically? So from South Africa to West Africa, what are some investments we could create throughout the diaspora? South America to West Africa.
I think that we can invest in our relationships. I know that DC has a sister city relationship with El Salvador, and I think that those with larger cities is very important in order to share ideas and share best practices on growth and investment. There's always an interest in communicating better about small local businesses and having an exchange maybe through education and through travel and collaboratives so that smaller local businesses can grow within their communities.
I think education is one of the strongest points. At Howard, our President Wayne Frederick, is from Trinidad and Tobago. We have students who are from the continent who go to Howard. I'm African American, so this idea that education kind of brings us together, and through our student success, we're able to either go back to our countries and lift our countries up or our communities up, but continue to create these connections that are sustainable outside of this space. So as much as some students travel to DC to study and work, they take what they study and work back to their communities. And much as those of us who stay in DC or stay in Maryland or stay in this area, we try our best to build and buy and connect and cite and develop each other. So I think education is definitely one of those most important ways to lift up.
I totally agree. And Africa, as we know today, has the highest rate of youth. It is estimated that about 60% of the African population is 30 or younger. And if we invest in education of the African American youth and the African youth, the Caribbean youth, the South and Central American youth, black youth everywhere. I want to suggest something here. The Obama administration initiated yearly Young African Leadership Initiative. Young African leaders come to the United States once a year, and they learn a lot. They are exposed to great experiences. They go back and they continue building their sense of leadership in government, business, etc. I would like to suggest that we make that one-way street a multi-way street, whereby we have young people from the African American community, from the Caribbean community, the Central and South American community, and Africa. We have that exchange, a program that will continue annually, and these young people are going to develop their own networks going forward. So I believe in a matter of 10, 15, 20 years, that idea of blacks investing in them and their future everywhere in the world will work.
I love that. Does Howard University have any programs similar?
Yes, so we have with 2 A's. So we take Caribbean and African American students to the continent. So we go to South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, and Ethiopia throughout the school year. And there's also multiple also, I think they also go to Egypt as well, and Tanzania. So.
Okay. And are there any business exchanges or economic experiences or investments?
Yeah, so students take courses, the language studies, they do some projects. Those students who do business, we have students who do social work. So for those who are interested in social work, those who are health students, they all have research projects where they study, collect data, come back, present either at embassies or in community events. And it's been an ongoing thing at Howard for years. So the idea of Howard being an international institution has always been there, and they continue to kind of send students and build. And also, again, students also come from the continent and the Caribbean and Haiti, also to Howard as well. So Howard in DC has been an international community for the nation. So that continues to be a thing we do.
Go HU.
You know.
And I would like our panelists to introduce herself.
Good evening, and my apologies for getting here late. I'm Doreen Thompson, and I represent the Caribbean community in this discussion. I was on the first African and Caribbean Commission that was created under Marion Barry. One of our major efforts right now is to get an Office of Caribbean Affairs. All the other folks here, I think, are represented by an office, and so our efforts have been to get the Caribbean community represented, meaning tax dollars also focused on DC's Caribbean community. In response, I want to pick up where you were talking about economic development. My interest is local. I think you've got to grow where you're planted. We have to spend our dollars with black businesses. We have to consciously make that decision, asking yourselves, if you're going to a restaurant, you're going out to dinner, who exactly are you spending your money with? There is Black Restaurant Week, for example, that takes place in DC. It's not to exclude. It's really just to be conscious that this is what it takes. My interest is food. It's sort of my passion. We have to give our businesses a chance. And if we don't start amongst ourselves, we can't expect others to do that. So again, I said my interest is local. I think we can talk about gentrification, we can talk about these changes that occur in the city, but first and foremost, we've got to support each other. Thank you.
That's right. I do have a follow-up question to that, and this might be a little bit controversial. I'm hoping not, though. So when you say support black businesses, would that be all-inclusive of African business, Caribbean businesses, Afro-Latino businesses, or would that just mean African-American businesses?
I think all businesses. The African diaspora is really what I'm referring to when I say black businesses. Often what happens with us, I know I'm speaking, for example, about the restaurant business. It requires a certain level of capitalization. Not everybody can step out there and make it work initially, and this is why I say you support them. And I don't mean that you should tolerate, bad service or bad food or anything on that order, but just give them a chance the same way you give other businesses, and you seek them out. There's a book, a young lady, I can't think of her name, it's called My Black Year, where she decided for a year, she would really focus on supporting all, businesses, black businesses, which are, again, the African diaspora. Thanks.
Okay. Answer that? Or did? Okay.
I agree. Restaurants, I have a black optometrist, I have a black doctor, I have everything. I think we should encourage to do everything black, just to start home first. I agree. And that's also, when I travel to the continent, I travel with the South African Airlines on the Delta. So even in travel, try to think about how you can put ourselves first.
Just being intentional.
Very intentional. Because if we're not intentional about ourselves, who will be? Right? So if we start with ourselves first, that it helps everyone across the board.
I just add also employ local and employ youth also, who can find opportunity and growth and mentorship through your program.
All right. And so, Census 2020 is upon us. How many of you all know that Census is going to be online this year? Raise your hand. Okay, so there's a lot of people that don't know. Census 2020 will be online. You can complete it online. You'll get a postcard in the mail. I believe March 16th through the 21st, you'll start seeing a postcard. And you can sign up and then fill out the census online. So you don't have to have, the paper form or anything like that. You can complete it online. But if you need it, you can get the paper form. You can call in, but we just want people to know that it's online. But as we talk about Census 2020, I had to make that plug. Census 2020 is very important. Black and brown communities have been historically underrepresented. How can we leverage our existing cultural, economic, and political assets together to receive the resources we need to thrive?
Messengers in our community, we have churches, organizations, universities. I think that it's important for people to know what the census is and what it isn't. I mean, I personally am reluctant to put up too much information to some where I don't know where it's going, right? Anybody would have reluctance to do so, but I think people need to really understand the value that is added to your community when people know what your needs are, how that should affect budget and investment in your community. And so I think that the more people understand what it is, the more that they would be willing to take the time out to fill out the census.
And I'm going to go a little deeper, right? So as staff in the city administrator's office, what does that look like in terms of budget allocations?
That's interesting, yeah. So every year the mayor dedicates a certain amount of money to education, to public safety, to all her different departments under her deputy mayors. And a lot of that is informed by the information that she receives at community meetings and from the community about their needs. I believe the census is another more amplified version of that. As in the office of the city administrator in public affairs and in communications, a lot of what we do is develop imagery and develop effective means of pushing information out to the different agencies to kind of develop the messaging that we want agencies to use when dealing with their different constituencies. So that's mainly the function of the Office of the City Administrator as it relates to the census and encouraging people to fill out their forms.
And I think it's about $9,000 each one of you are worth if you live here in the District of Columbia to what we receive, right? And so there's billions at stake, right? And so federal dollars are then sent to our city administrator and then added to our budget. So we need you to complete the census so that we know, A, how many people live in our neighborhoods, but also what do you need? Do you need a new road? You need more parks? You need more seats for schools? You need a new rec center? And so all of those decisions are made not only fiscally, but just in planning for our communities.
I agree. I think there's definitely value in being counted, that many, despite the systematic sense of surveillance that we're fear of, right? People know where I am. What will they do with that information that people are kind of hesitant about? But I think people understand there's value in being counted. I think the leveraging power is the accountability, right? So I have to know that I need that much money. Will you give it to me, right? How do I follow that? How do I make sure that it gets to me, which is some of the stress that I think if we all are holding each other accountable, it's helpful, right? So from all levels, from all sides, from all edges, if we're able to be counted and hold everyone accountable, then it'll be better, right? So I think that's the second part that we hope happens as we move forward.
Yeah, I think this year's census is more complicated because mentally a lot of people have been scared, even though the citizenship question is not likely to be there, but people have already been conditioned and being more or less active in the African communities, local communities here. I know what I'm hearing. You see sometimes in a family where, let's say, the husband and the wife are immigrants. One is already a citizen, the other has a green card, so they are legal residents of the United States and DC, and they have relatives who are here, even if they are here legally, but they don't have the citizenship or some other guaranteeing status. They are afraid. And you hear even the person with the green card saying, I don't know if I put all this information there, if they're not going to use that to go after my brother, my sister, my other relatives whose situation is not like that. And everybody in that household is contributing to the economy, is a law-abiding resident, citizens, and so on. And I think we should amplify the education, the community education, so that people understand there should be no risk about completing the census information. Otherwise, we will keep being sidelined, and that should be a priority as far as I see it.
I probably want to ask you guys this question. I know one of the challenges.
Maybe just speak up a little bit. I think they're rolling some equipment out.
One of the challenges in the Caribbean community was how do you also identify?
Yes, that's the question.
Yes. So my understanding is, and I haven't really done any research on this, is that this year you do have the ability to identify where your heritage. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's the question that I had that gets a little deeper, right? So we talk about this collective blackness that we are and that we need to propel ourselves forward. But if we divide, right? So if you say you're Caribbean, you say you're West African, you say you're American, you say you're, Afro-Latino or Latinx, what would that do for the blackness and for those resources to come to our communities?
My understanding is it's not, you're still under the category of being African American. And it's just really identifying your cultural, that it's not actually taking away from that number.
I would add to that, that I don't think we should fear diversity. I think when we are able to show the multi-level sense of blackness is helpful, right? I think making us mono-black, which is real and it's uniting. I can be black, Akan, Haitian, I can be all that and it'd be okay. Like we can become complex in identity and show that there is complexity in history and legacy and still receive some type of economic benefit. So I don't think we should fear diversity and say it's dividing us. I think it's just showing diversity in a diasporic sense of blackness that many people may not know about until they see all these options and know that blackness is all this diverse.
I like that.
We have many different identities. So I think
Absolutely. And I think it's good for people to hear that, right? Because sometimes it's easy just to clump it all, like you're black and that's it. But there's so many nuances to who we are as people. And even if you're not black, right? There are different European countries and heritages and cultures and Asian. And so no one is just one thing, but I'm really happy to hear from your perspectives. In terms of community and unity, how can our communities work together to create a more inclusive DC? And we do a really good job at working together. And the DC is a very diverse city, but how could we be even more inclusive from your perspective? And if you had any initiatives right now, please share them.
Coming from the government's perspective, being one of the largest organizations in the city, I think it's very important for us to be an engine of bringing people together like we have tonight, so that people can share ideas and kind of get to know each other and continue to build and educate ourselves on what we have in the city and the robustness of all of our cultures. It'd be wonderful if big organizations would make that a priority.
I think from Howard's standpoint, I'll speak on that. We do have a dual enrollment program that allows DC students to take Howard classes, and in that conversation on Howard's campus, we do have like the mix of all cultural identities in that. So encouraging our young people to take African studies courses, African American courses on Caribbean, Haitian studies, and Latin American studies that opens up the education, solution. That anyone from the community can come to Howard, take classes, anyone in any elementary school can expose to cultures through this educational spaces and hubs, and also through the libraries are also a good job to encourage culture across the area.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would like to add there is perhaps to suggest that the DC Mayor's Office and Howard University, for instance, and also maybe other HBCUs around, to work together during the Black History Month, for example, have a day-long, if not a week-long, depending on the resources.
Come on, let's get a week. Come on, let's do it.
Have a week-long intercultural activities where we bring, because these HBCUs we have, judging by Howard University, we have students, faculty, staff from all over the Black world. So if we were to bring all those here for a whole week, to have all these activities, music, food, clothing, everything in between, I think by the end of the week, we will have created or reinforced a spirit of community and inclusiveness, and using also social media to intensify that. In 2 years, 3 years, 4 years time, we will have really consolidated, in my view, a DC, an inclusive DC or DMV Black community.
Thank you, I like that.
Well, my thoughts are you should stay curious. You don't actually have